And now we'll see SA610 here using the work of internal auditors. The objective of the external auditor, that's B, where the entity has an internal audit function. For few entities, for few classes of entities, internal audit is mandatory, right? For that, those have internal audit function, and the external auditor expect to use the work of that internal auditor or to modify the nature, timing, extent of the audit procedures that they were also allocating for that to be performed directly by the external auditor or use the internal auditors by a direct assistant. First thing, they're using the work of internal audit function. Second thing, they were using direct assistance from the internal auditor himself. What are his objectives when he used that? To determine whether the work of internal audit function or direct assistance from internal auditors can be used. First, he has to check whether he could use that or not, whether that would be okay or not, whether that would be adequate enough to use that in appropriate or not. First, he has to determine whether the work or direct assistant is appropriate or not to use them. And but if using, okay, he found that okay, it's fine to use that because the internal auditor function they have objectivity and then etc. their integrity and have ethical values and they have particular competence and all. He thought okay, they can use the internal auditor's work or take direct assistance from him if using the work to determine whether that work is adequate for the purpose of audit or not. First, we have to check whether that internal auditor or audit work has to be used or not. Second thing, whether that work is adequate enough or not. While taking the direct assistance, what the auditor has to do, he has to direct, supervise, and review the work of the internal auditor while taking direct assistance. That is the objectives of the auditor. And now, what are the responsibilities of that? What are his objectives? Are his responsibilities? External auditor's responsibilities not reduced while using the work of internal audit function or taking direct assistance. Likewise, and you see what they are saying the external auditor responsibility is, it was mostly tested in MCQs or some case scenarios. How is that a management fraud had happened and it was found by the internal audit function. Okay, now this external auditor has to report that or not. There's a question there. You see, you have to write this. Uh, what you have to write, the external auditor's responsibility will not be you see, instead of placing that external auditor, you could write that name that was given in the case scenario itself. Those auditors would not be diminished or reduced by the internal audit function that was there. Since they were reporting, it's not that he was free from reporting that. His responsibility also will be there for that fraud. So he's independent to the internal audit function or his responsibilities. Okay? So the fraud, even though it was reported by the internal audit function, he also have to report that fraud. That's what the responsibility they are talking about. And any kind of responsibility with regards to the omission of any amount or disclosures. You see, these are all why he went to the audit the financial statement, what they contain. They contain all the amounts or the disclosures, etc. First, responsibility was not reduced, and with regards to any kind of omission of amount or disclosures and incorrect accounting estimates and judgments that were taken by the management, whether they were unreasonable, etc. And then policies, accounting policies that the financial statements were prepared were inappropriate. These were the external auditor's responsibility that refer to that. And with regards to that, and what is this essay mostly talks about the usage of work of internal auditor or take direct assistance. There were two categories. Every point goes into two tracks, right? First thing, before using the work or before taking the direct assistance from internal audit function or internal auditor, what the external auditor has to do while determining whether the work could be used or not. First, he have to check objectivity, competence, and his approach of the quality controls. Okay, what he has to do. While not only the internal auditor, while using the work of the management expert or the other auditor or any kind of auditor's expert also, while using somebody's work, what we check? We check the competence of them and their objectivity and their ethical values or the quality standards. were following, and any kind of works or the knowledge degree, etc. We'll check that. And here we are seeing the objectivity of the internal auditor, and they're not objectivity means not showing any kind of bias. That's one thing. And second thing is the level of competence of the internal auditor and how well they could perform the internal audit function and approach of internal audit function, including the quality control, how they were doing approaching to any kind of misstatement or irregularities or any kind of deviation, how they were performing the audit procedures while using the work, and while determining whether they wanted to use the direct assistance, what he has to check. He has to check again the objectivity and the competence. That's it. He has to check whether there exist any threats for objectivity, and whether he has to determine the level of competence also. And after all this determination, before that is this is done before, right? Now, the external auditor determined that he will use the work of the internal audit or take direct assistance. Then what he has to do? While using the work of internal audit function, what he has to do? The nature and scope of work of internal audit function and its relevance to the external auditor's overall audit strategy and plan. That's again we have seen in the objectives, right? What? First, he has to determine whether they could use that or not. That's what we have discussed prior. Now, what we are going to discuss whether they were adequate or not. That work is adequate or not. With that, they were relevant or not, and making all the significant judgments in preventing undue usage of the internal audit function. These 2 points you have to write. And while taking direct assistance, the amount of judgment. You see, judgment was mostly involved here, right, with regards to the usage of the internal audit function or taking direct assistance from the internal auditor. Mostly the judgment was mostly involved here and assess the risk of material misstatement. And an external auditor being sufficiently involved in the audit, they have to communicate TCWG and document the above things. That how they were using what or type of what the areas he was using the work from, or from what all the things, or what are all the things that were given to the auditor for the direct assistance and all. And while using the work and taking direct assistance from the internal audit function, what he has to do? He has to discuss the planned usage of the audit function. That's the scope of the internal audit function they were using, and read the internal financial statements, etc., and perform sufficient audit procedures to evaluate the internal audit function. Okay, he has to discuss what all he is using that, and read the report of internal audit functions and internal audit report, and perform sufficient audit procedures to evaluate internal audit function. Its internal audit function is mostly like internal controls, right? It's a part of internal control system. And while using the direct assistant, what he has to do is obtain written agreement from the entity. Written agreement from the internal auditors. Entity here refers to the management. And direct supervise and review the work performed by the internal auditors. That's what we have seen in this third objective. You see, while using the internal auditor, you have to not use what all the matters that were done by the internal auditor himself. Like if the internal auditor had done some X category of work, you have to not take direct assistance from the same work. That's like a self-review threat. Okay. And you have to not use the significant judgments that the auditor has to take. These were the 2 points you have to remember in extra from this PDF. I have missed here. And this is like mostly like behavioral science. You see, it's a self-review thread. One who does the work cannot review the work or cannot audit that work that exists there. And so, moreover, you have to not believe or rely in the audit procedures or the things that require SEs to do by yourself, to obtain the information directly by yourself through internal auditor. Okay, you have to not do these two things. First thing, you have to not assign the work to the internal auditor that he only had performed to review. Okay, that's first thing. What first thing is talking about, the one who does the work should not review the work. Okay, and second thing is all the significant judgments or that was wanted to, like what, fixing the materiality, performance materiality and assessing the risk of material misstatement, all the things that have to be done by the auditor himself as per standards of auditing, right? You have to not assign that to the internal auditors. And with that said, we have completed our SS610.